The first alien ship arrived on a Tuesday morning in the year 2247, and humanity did something that would shape the next 300 years of galactic history. They lied, not small lies. Not half-truths, but a complete and total deception that every government on Earth agreed to within 72 hours of detecting the approaching vessel. The truth was that humanity had seen them coming 18 months before the aliens announced themselves. And in those 18 months, the leaders of Earth had made a decision that went against every instinct their species possessed. They decided to hide everything. Director Yuki Tanaka stood in the underground command center beneath the Swiss Alps and watched the feeds from 100 different satellites, all tracking the alien ship as it entered the solar system with what they clearly believed was perfect stealth. "They think we cannot see them," she said to the assembled leaders, presidents and prime ministers and generals from every major nation, all gathered in the same room for the first time in human history. "Then we let them keep thinking that," replied President Chun of the Eastern Coalition, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what they faced. The plan was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. And yet humanity pulled it off with a coordination that surprised even themselves. The quantum computing networks that connected every major city went dark, their servers buried in facilities so deep that no scanner could detect them. The antimatter production plants on the dark side of the moon were dismantled and scattered across 1,000 asteroids in the outer belt. The military fleet, 900 warships equipped with technology that humanity had developed in secret over the past century, jumped to the empty space between stars where no one would ever think to look. And when the Galactic Council finally made their grand entrance, announcing themselves to the primitive species of the third planet, they found exactly what humanity wanted them to find: a world still burning fossil fuels, ships that could barely reach their own moon, and a population that seemed appropriately awed and terrified by the magnificent beings who had descended from the stars. Ambassador Yelena Vasquez was chosen for first contact because she had the perfect combination of intelligence and humility, the ability to smile while being insulted and nod while being dismissed. She sat in the grand chamber of the council flagship and listened as the Velthari delegate, a tall being with scales that shimmered like oil on water, explained the situation to her as if speaking to a child. "Your species has been classified as level 7, the Velthari said, his translator rendering his words in a tone of bored condescension. "This means you are suitable for minor trade agreements and settlement of territories that no other species wants. We are grateful for the Council's consideration," Yelena replied, her voice soft and humble. "You should be," said the Krovani representative, a massive creature with 4 arms and eyes that burned like red coals. "Many species at your level are simply harvested for resources and labor." Yelena bowed her head to hide the cold fury in her eyes. "The Council is most generous." Behind her polite facade, Yelena was recording everything, analyzing everything, sending encrypted bursts of data back to Earth through channels the Council could not detect. The assessment of humanity took 3 months, and in that time, Council scientists examined human technology, human biology, human culture, and human history. They found a species that had nearly destroyed itself 12 times over, that had fought wars over resources and ideology and simple hatred, that had polluted their own planet almost beyond recovery. Violent but contained was the official report. Primitive but showing some potential for development over the next several millennia. Recommended for buffer zone placement. The Council was pleased, and humanity smiled and thanked them for the honor of being placed on the very edge of civilized space, in 3 star systems so barren that no other species had bothered to claim them. Director Tanaka read the Council's assessment in her underground bunker and allowed herself a small, cold smile. They see exactly what we want them to see. The years passed, and humanity spread to their new territories with the slow, plodding determination that the Council expected from a primitive species. They built colonies on harsh worlds, terraforming with technology that seemed appropriately crude, and they traded with their neighbors for resources they could have easily created themselves. The act was perfect because it was not entirely an act. Humanity really was recovering from centuries of self-inflicted wounds, really was struggling to unite their fractured nations, really was learning to work together in ways they never had before. The difference was that they were also doing so much more in the spaces between stars, in facilities hidden from every sensor the Council possessed. Humanity was building. They called it the Prometheus Network, a web of stations and shipyards and research facilities that spanned the galaxy, all connected by quantum entanglement that made communication instantaneous across any distance. The technology they had hidden from the Council was not abandoned but improved, refined, pushed to limits that would have seemed like magic to the beings who had dismissed them as primitives, and they watched. They watched as the Velthari annexed 3 smaller species. Through economic manipulation and military threat, they watched as the Kovani Empire expanded its borders, leaving a trail of destroyed civilizations in its wake. They watched as the Council voted to look the other way, again and again, because challenging the powerful was too dangerous and the weak had no voice. "Why do we not act?" asked a young officer named Adara Okonkwo, standing in the command center of Station Prometheus and watching feeds from 100 different conflicts. Director Tanaka, now old and gray but still sharp, looked at her protégé with understanding. "Because we are not yet strong enough to end this," she said. "We could win a war, but winning a war is not enough. We must be strong enough to end the very concept of war. People are dying." "Yes," Tanaka agreed. And the weight of that single word carried 3 centuries of guilt. "And every death is a price we pay for the future we are building." She turned back to the displays, to the hidden fleet that had grown from 900 ships to 90,000, to the weapons that could crack planets and the shields that could withstand stars. "One day," she promised, "we will be ready, and when that day comes, no one will ever die under the boot of Empire again." Adara Okonkwo remembered those words, and she carried them with her through decades of patient waiting, through promotions and losses and the slow accumulation of power that no one in the galaxy suspected. She would be the one to give the order when the time finally came, but that time was not yet, for now. Humanity smiled and bowed and pretended to be furniture, and they waited. 150 years after first contact, a Zariel trading ship drifted into human space with its engines failing and its life support nearly gone. The crew expected to die, because no one helped strangers in Council space, because kindness was weakness and weakness was death. Instead, a human patrol vessel appeared beside them within hours, its crew working through the night to repair their ship and share their food and medicine. "Why would you do this?" asked Captain Thelvos, his empathic senses overwhelmed by the genuine warmth radiating from the humans around him. The human captain, a woman named Maria Santos, simply shrugged. "Because you needed help." That simple act of kindness began a friendship that would last for 2 centuries. A quiet alliance between the Zariel and humanity that puzzled everyone who observed it. The Zariel were empaths, beings who could sense the emotions of others, and they found in humans something they had never encountered before: complexity. Every other species they had met was readable, their emotions flowing in predictable patterns that the Zariel could understand and navigate. But humans were different. Humans could feel rage and compassion at the same time, could burn with hatred and love in the same heartbeat, could hold contradictions within themselves that should have torn them apart. You are chaos, Telvos told Maria during one of their many conversations. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Maria laughed at that. We prefer to call it potential. The Zariel shared their knowledge freely with humanity, teaching them agricultural techniques that could make barren worlds bloom and stellar, cartography that mapped safe routes through dangerous space. In return, humanity shared something the Zariel valued even more: stories. The humans had so many stories. Tales of heroes and villains, of wars and peace, of love and loss and redemption. The Zariel had never encountered a species so obsessed with narrative, with the idea that every being had a story worth telling. You believe everyone matters, Telvos observed one day. Even your enemies, even your monsters. Everyone has a story, Maria agreed. That does not mean every story is good, but it means every story is real. While this friendship grew in the light, humanity continued its work in the darkness. Commander Adara Okonkwo had risen through the ranks of the Hidden Fleet, and now she stood at the heart of Station Prometheus as its commanding officer. The station had grown beyond anything the original planners had imagined. A city in the void between galaxies, home to millions of humans who would live and die without ever being known to the Council. They were the Watchers, the builders, the keepers of humanity's true strength. Report, Okonkwo said, settling into her command chair. The Velthari have begun moving against the Morvith Collective, her aide reported, pulling up displays that showed fleet movements and diplomatic communications. Council vote is expected within a month. How will they vote? The same way they always vote, the aide replied with barely concealed bitterness. The Corvani will abstain, the minor powers will fall in line, and 17 billion Morvith will become slaves. Okonkwo studied the data, running calculations in her head. The Morvith were a peaceful species, philosophers and artists who had never developed military technology because they had never believed they would need it. They had trusted the Council to protect them. That trust would be their death. What is our current fleet strength? Okonkwo asked. 112,000 combat vessels, fully armed and ready for deployment. Another 40,000 in final construction. And the Council? Their combined military is approximately 60,000 ships, most of which are decades behind our current technology. The numbers were overwhelming, had been overwhelming for nearly a century, and yet humanity still did not act. I know what you are thinking, said a voice from behind her, and Okonkwo turned to see Director Chun, the grandson of the president who had first ordered humanity to hide. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but his mind was still sharp. I am thinking that we have the power to stop this, Okonkwo admitted. I am thinking that we have had the power for a long time, and yet we wait. And yet we wait. Chun lowered himself into a chair beside her, looking at the displays with eyes that had seen too much. When I was young, he said, I asked my grandfather the same question you want to ask me. I asked why we did not simply reveal ourselves and take control. What did he say? He said that power without wisdom is just another form of tyranny. Chun replied. He said that if we revealed ourselves before we were ready, before we truly understood the galaxy and ourselves, we would become exactly what we sought to destroy. Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. Do you believe we are ready now? Chun smiled, and there was sadness in that smile. I believe we are close, but not yet. I believe we still have lessons to learn, and I fear that those lessons will come at a terrible price. He was right. The price would come 3 years later, in fire and blood and the screams of 17 billion innocent beings, but not the Morvith. The Zariel, the Corvani Empire, had been watching the friendship between humanity and the Zariel with growing suspicion. They did not understand why the primitive humans would waste resources on empaths who offered nothing of military value. Unless the humans were not as primitive as they appeared, the investigation was quiet, careful, probing at the edges of human space for any sign of hidden strength. They found nothing, because humanity had been hiding for over 200 years and had become very good at it, but the suspicion remained. And when the Corvani looked at a map of the galaxy, they saw the Zariel homeworld sitting right between their territory and the human systems, a perfect strategic position, a position that could not be allowed to remain in potentially hostile hands. The order was given, and the Corvani fleet mobilized not against humanity, not directly, but against the friends of humanity, against the Zariel. When the news reached Station Prometheus, Commander Okonkwo felt something cold settle in her chest. How long until they reached Zariel Prime? 6 days. And the Council? They have voted to classify it as an internal territorial matter. Okonkwo closed her eyes. 17 billion Zariel. Poets and dreamers and empaths who had shown humanity kindness when no one else would. 6 days until they all died. She opened her eyes. Get me Director Chun. The Corvani fleet entered Zariel space on a morning that the poets of that world had declared blessed by their ancient gods by evening. Those gods were silent, and the screams of the dying filled every frequency. The Zariel had no weapons capable of stopping the assault, no shields that could withstand the bombardment, no allies willing to risk the wrath of the Corvani Empire. They sent one final message before their communication networks went dark. It was addressed to humanity. Our friends, the message said, do not mourn us. Do not blame yourselves. You showed us kindness in a galaxy that had forgotten what kindness meant. That was enough. That was everything. Ambassador Chen Wei stood in the council chamber and listened to the Corvani representative explain why the massacre was necessary and legal. The Zariel were harboring potential threats to galactic security, the Corvani said, his red eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Their territory has been annexed for the protection of all council species. 17 billion dead, Chen Wei said, his voice flat, a regrettable but necessary action. Chen Wei looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 species, all of them silent, all of them complicit. For 300 years, humanity had smiled and bowed and pretended. For 300 years, they had watched injustice after injustice and told themselves that the time was not right. They had been wrong. I would like to request, Chen Wei said slowly, that the council reconsider its position on the Zariel annexation. Laughter rippled through the chamber. High Counselor Tethvaran, a being of crystalline form that refracted light in patterns meant to inspire awe, leaned forward on his throne. The human delegation lacks standing to challenge council rulings. As the ambassador surely knows, I am aware of the current rules. Chen Wei agreed. Then you are wasting our time. Chen Wei nodded as if accepting a mild rebuke. Tell me, he said, in all the years the council has existed, has any species ever successfully hidden their true capabilities from your assessment teams? The question was unexpected, and Tethvaran took a moment to consider it. Such deception would be impossible. He finally said, our technology can detect any known form of energy production, any weapon system, any significant military asset, any known form. Chen Wei repeated something in his tone made the chamber grow quiet. What are you suggesting? Ambassador, Chen Wei reached into his pocket and removed a small device. Holding it up for all to see, I am suggesting, he said, that humanity has been lying to you since the day we met. He pressed the button across the galaxy, in council space and beyond. 18,000 human warships dropped their stealth fields at the exact same moment on every council world. Satellites that had been invisible for centuries suddenly appeared in orbit, their weapon systems powering up with a hum that could be felt through the very ground defense platforms. The size of small moons materialized at strategic points throughout the known galaxy, each one capable of destroying entire fleets, and on every council communication frequency. A simple message appeared: humanity has stopped pretending. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Teferen surged to his feet, his crystalline body flashing with colors that meant fear in his species. "This is impossible," he shouted. "Our sensors, our technology. Your technology is 3,000 years behind ours," Chen Wei said calmly. "You never had a chance of detecting us." The Kovani ambassador was already calling for his fleet, screaming orders into his communicator. "Your fleet will not respond," Chen Wei informed him. "We have been jamming your communications since before I entered this chamber. This is an act of war." "No," Chen Wei said, and his voice carried through the suddenly silent chamber. "This is an act of justice." He stepped forward, and the representatives who had dismissed him for centuries now scrambled backward in their seats. "For 300 years, we watched you, we studied you. We learned everything about your military capabilities, your political structures, your strengths and your weaknesses." He looked directly at the Corvani ambassador. "We know that your empire depends on slave labor from 6 different species. We know the location of every prison world, every forced labor camp, every facility where the weak are broken for the benefit of the strong." He turned to the Velthari delegation. "We know that your economy would collapse within a decade without the resources you extract from annexed worlds. We know the names of every official who has profited from genocide." He faced the High Counselor himself. "And we know that you, Teferen, have personally authorized the destruction of 4 civilizations because they refused to bow to council authority." The chamber was utterly silent. "Humanity makes the following announcements," Chen Wei continued. "First, the Kovani Empire will withdraw all forces from Zariel space within 24 hours. The Zariel are dead." The Kovani ambassador spat. "There is nothing to withdraw from," Chen Wei smiled. "And there was no warmth in it. 12 million Zariel survived. Hidden in bunkers we helped them build, protected by shields we provided in secret. Your massacre was slightly less complete than you believed." Hope, impossible hope, flashed across the faces of several delegates. "Second," Chen Wei continued, "the practice of forced annexation ends today. Any species that wishes to leave the Council or its member empires may do so freely, and humanity will guarantee their protection." "You cannot possibly. We have 112,000 warships," Chen Wei interrupted. "You have 60,000, many of which are already disabled by systems we planted in your shipyards decades ago." He let that sink in. "Third, this council as it currently exists is dissolved. A new governing body will be formed, one that represents all species equally, one where the weak have a voice and the strong cannot simply take what they want." Teferen found his voice at last. "And if we refuse?" Chen Wei looked at him with something that might have been pity. "High Counselor, I have just informed you that we have been among you for 3 centuries, that we have infiltrated every level of your society, that we could destroy your entire civilization before you finished your next sentence." He paused. "If we wanted conquest, you would already be conquered. If we wanted revenge, you would already be dead." He turned to address the entire chamber. "We do not want conquest. We do not want revenge. We want something that apparently has never existed in this galaxy." His voice rose. "We want justice." In the silence that followed, a small voice spoke up. It was the ambassador from the Morvith, the species that had been scheduled for annexation. A tiny being who had never dared to speak in council chambers before. "What do you want from us?" she asked. Chen Wei smiled. And this time, the smile was genuine. "We want you to help us build something better." Far away, on the bridge of her flagship, Commander Okonkwo watched the feeds from the council chamber and allowed herself a moment of something she had not felt in years. Hope, all ships report ready, her aide said. Hold position. Okonkwo ordered, let the ambassador work. And if they choose war, Okonkwo looked at the displays showing the positions of every council vessel, every defense platform, every military installation. All of them were already targeted. Then we end it before it begins. The Corvani did not believe it. 3 centuries of absolute dominance had convinced them that no species could truly threaten their power. And the idea that the weak little humans had been hiding such strength seemed like a bluff designed to intimidate Admiral Kethril of the Corvani. Imperial fleet gathered every ship under his command. 12,000 vessels representing the most powerful armada in council space. These humans think they can frighten us with tricks and holograms, he announced to his captains. We will show them what happens to species that dare to threaten the Empire. He chose the human colony of New Helsinki as his target. A world of 4 million souls on the edge of human territory. The fleet jumped to hyperspace with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. They emerged in the New Helsinki system to find a single human vessel waiting. For them, it was smaller than a Corvani cruiser, barely larger than a patrol craft, and it sat motionless in the void as if it had been expecting them. Is this their defense? Kethril laughed. 1 ship against 12,000. He ordered the attack. 12,000 Corvani vessels opened fire simultaneously, pouring enough energy into that single target to crack a small moon when the light faded. The human ship was completely undamaged. Kethril felt the first cold touch of fear. All ships, concentrate fire on. He never finished the sentence. The human ship moved in a way that Corvani physics said was impossible. Not through normal space, but through something else, appearing simultaneously in a dozen different locations, and then it fired. The weapons were not like anything Kethril had ever seen. Not beams of energy or missiles or any technology his species understood. They simply unmade things, molecular bonds dissolved at their touch. Solid matter becoming clouds of individual atoms in an instant. Ships that had taken years to build reduced to expanding gas in microseconds. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the entire Corvani fleet had ceased to exist as anything more than a thin haze of particles spreading slowly through the void. Not a single human had died. The news reached the Corvani homeworld before Kethril's dying message could be completed, transmitted by human ships that had been observing the battle from a dozen different angles. Every military installation on Corvus Prime received the same footage, the same undeniable evidence that their greatest fleet had been annihilated by a single vessel that had not even bothered to avoid their attacks. The Emperor of the Corvani called for unconditional surrender within 6 hours. But what happened next was not what anyone expected. Human ships appeared in orbit around Corvus Prime, and the population braced for the bombardment that their own empire had inflicted on so many others. Instead, the ships began transmitting coordinates for aid stations. Medical vessels arrived, carrying doctors and medicine and equipment to treat diseases that had plagued the Corvani lore. Classes for generations. Engineering teams offered to repair infrastructure that the Empire had neglected while pouring resources into military expansion. Agricultural specialists brought seeds and techniques that would allow Corvani worlds to feed themselves without relying on tribute from a conquered species. I do not understand, the Corvani Emperor said when he met with Admiral Yuki Tanaka. Aboard her flagship, Tanaka was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death, and she looked at the being who had ordered the massacre of the Zariel with an expression he could not read. What do you not understand? You have defeated us completely. You could take everything, enslave our people, Strip our worlds of every resource. Yes. Then why would you help us? Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. Do you know why humanity hid for 3 centuries? She finally asked. The Emperor shook his head. We hid because we knew that if we revealed our power before we were ready, we would become tyrants. We would use our strength to dominate and control. And we would tell ourselves that it was justified, that we were bringing order to chaos, that we were better masters than the ones who came before. She met his eyes. But we did not spend 300 years preparing for war. We spent 300 years preparing for peace. Peace. A real peace. Not the kind enforced by fear. Not the kind that lasts only as long as the strongest army remains vigilant. But a peace built on cooperation and mutual benefit. She gestured to the displays showing human relief efforts spreading across Corvani space. Your empire was built on extraction, on taking from the weak to feed the strong. It was never sustainable. It would have collapsed eventually, probably violently, probably taking half the galaxy with it. You cannot know that. We can, Tanaka said simply. Because we have done extensive studies. Because we have been watching and learning for 3 centuries. Because we have seen exactly this pattern destroy civilizations again and again. She leaned forward. The Corvani are not monsters. You are simply what happens when a species develops power before it develops wisdom. You had the strength to take whatever you wanted, so you took. And you never asked whether there was a better way. And you believe there is a better way. I know there is. She stood and walked to the viewport. Looking out at the planet below, humanity almost destroyed itself a dozen times before we reached the stars. We had the same impulses, the same capacity for cruelty and conquest. We burned our own world and slaughtered our own people for reasons that seem incomprehensible now. What changed? We learned, Tanaka said. Slowly, painfully, through failure after failure. We learned that cooperation produces more than competition. That investing in others creates more wealth than stealing from them. That societies built on justice are more stable than societies built on force. She turned back to face him. We are not offering you charity. We are offering you a better strategy. A way of organizing your civilization that will make you stronger and more prosperous than you ever were as conquerors. The Emperor struggled to understand. You want nothing in return. We want you to stop conquering. Stop enslaving. Stop destroying. We want you to join a new order where species cooperate instead of compete. Where conflicts are resolved through dialogue instead of warfare. Where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. And if we refuse, Tanaka smiled. But it was a sad smile. You will not refuse. You have seen what we can do. You know that we could destroy you at any moment. And you know that we are choosing not to. She walked toward the door. That choice is not weakness. Emperor, it is the greatest strength we possess. And one day, when your people have had time to heal and grow, you will understand that. The Emperor sat alone for a long time after she left. He thought about the fleet that had been destroyed, about the generations of slaves his empire had created, about the worlds they had burned and the civilizations they had ended, and he thought about the human ships in orbit. Not conquering, not demanding, simply helping for the first time in his life. He felt something he could not identify. Later, he would learn that the humans called it shame. High Counselor Teffaran had ruled the Galactic Council for 3,000 years. He had seen species rise and fall, had watched empires grow fat on conquest and collapse under their own weight, had made decisions that shaped the lives of trillions. He had never knelt before anyone. Now he found himself on the polished floor of the human flagship, New Geneva, his crystalline form pressed against the deck in a posture of absolute submission. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked in a way it had not done since he was young. "We were wrong about everything. We beg humanity to show us a better way." President Amara Ase looked down at him. And her expression was not triumphant or cruel. It was tired, so very tired. "Get up," she said softly. Tethvarin did not move. Could not believe what he had heard. "Get up," Asay repeated. And she bent down to take his arm, helping him rise with her own hands. "We did not do this so you would kneel." The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembly. Representatives from every council species had gathered in the great hall of the New Geneva, and they watched in stunned silence as the most powerful human in existence personally lifted their former ruler to his feet. "For 300 years, Asay said, addressing not just Tethvarin but everyone present, humanity watched this galaxy tear itself apart. We saw a species enslaving species, civilizations erased from existence. Billions dying because those with power believed that power justified everything." She paused, and the weight of centuries pressed down on her shoulders. "We could have revealed ourselves sooner. We could have intervened before the Zariel massacre, before the Morvith almost lost their freedom, before so many others suffered and died." Her voice dropped. "Every death that happened while we waited is a weight we will carry forever." The chamber was absolutely silent, but we also learned something during those centuries of watching, something that every empire in history has failed to understand. She looked around at the faces before her, beings of 100 different species who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of council power. Force cannot create lasting peace. Fear cannot build stable civilizations. An order maintained by threats will collapse the moment those threats are removed. She activated a display that filled the air above their heads, showing plans and charts and projections that humanity had been developing for 3 centuries. "This is our proposal for what we call the New Covenant. Not a human empire, not a council with a new master, but something that has never existed in this galaxy before." She began to explain a Congress where every species had equal representation regardless of their military power or economic output, courts where disputes could be resolved through law rather than force, collective defense agreements that protected the weak from exploitation, economic systems designed to lift all species rather than extract wealth from some to benefit others, educational exchanges that would spread knowledge and technology freely, environmental protections that would preserve the diversity of life across the galaxy. "This will not be easy," Asay admitted. "There are species who have been conquered for so long that they have forgotten how to govern themselves. There are wounds that will take generations to heal. There are those who will resist any change to the old order." She looked directly at the Kovani delegation. "And there are those who have committed terrible crimes, whose hands are stained with the blood of billions." The Kovani ambassador flinched, expecting the pronouncement of their destruction. "But we did not spend 3 centuries preparing for vengeance." Asay's voice softened. "The Kovani will face justice, not extinction. Their leaders will be tried for their crimes. Their victims will receive reparations aid, and their people will be given the chance to build a new society based on cooperation rather than conquest." "Why?" the Kovani ambassador asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After what we did to the Zariel, after the massacre, why would you offer us this?" Asay was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. 3 centuries ago, when we first detected your ships approaching our world, we were terrified. We looked at the council and saw monsters, saw beings who would destroy us without a second thought." She paused. "So we hid, and we prepared for war, because we assumed that the galaxy was full of irredeemable evil." A small smile crossed her face. "But then we spent 300 years studying you, watching you, learning everything about your cultures and your histories and your people. And do you know what we found?" The chamber waited. "We found that there are no monsters. Not really. There are only people who were never shown a better way to live. People who grew up in systems that rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. People who became exactly what their circumstances shaped them to be. She extended her hand toward the Corvani ambassador. We could have emerged from hiding as conquerors. We could have become the new empire, the new force that keeps the galaxy in line through fear. And we would have told ourselves that we were different, that we were benevolent, that our domination was for everyone's own good. Her voice hardened. But that is exactly what every tyrant in history has believed. And we refused to become what we had sworn to fight. The Corvani ambassador looked at her extended hand as if it were a weapon he did not understand. This is not a trick, Osei said gently. This is not a trap. We genuinely believe that you can change. That your people can become partners rather than predators. That the future does not have to be defined by the crimes of the past. Slowly, hesitantly, the Corvani ambassador reached out and took her hand. It was not forgiveness, not absolution, but it was a beginning, one by one. The representatives of other species came forward, the Velthri, who had manipulated and exploited dozens of weaker civilizations, pledged to release their economic strangleholds. The remaining members of the old council agreed to submit to investigations of their past actions. Even Tethvaran, who had ruled with absolute power for millennia, accepted a role as historical advisor rather than demanding continued authority. And through it all, humanity asked for nothing but cooperation. When the formal signing of the new covenant was complete, when the representatives had returned to their ships to begin the long work of rebuilding, Asai stood alone at the viewport of her flagship. Admiral Tanaka found her there, staring out at the stars. You should rest, Tanaka said. The hard part is just beginning. Asai shook her head. Do you think we did the right thing? Keeping our strength hidden for so long, waiting while so many suffered. Tanaka stood beside her, following her gaze into the void. I think we did what we believed was necessary. I think every generation before us made the same calculation, weighing present suffering against future possibilities. I think the Zariel who died will never know that their sacrifice helped save the galaxy. That is not an answer. No. Tanaka agreed. But I do not think there is a good answer. Only the choices we made and the consequences we must live with. They stood in silence for a long moment. 1,000 years from now, Osei finally said, I wonder what they will say about us. They will say we were flawed, Tanaka replied. They will say we made mistakes, that we could have done better, that we should have acted sooner or differently. She smiled. But I think they will also say that when we finally had all the power in the galaxy, when we could have done anything we wanted, we chose to share it. Far below, on 100 worlds, the slow work of healing was beginning. Former slaves were learning to be free. Former masters were learning to be equals. And the galaxy, that had known only hierarchy and force, was taking its first uncertain steps towards something new. It would not be easy. It would not be quick. And there would be setbacks and failures and moments of despair. But humanity had waited 300 years for this moment. They could wait a little longer for a better future. And as the stars turned in their ancient courses, indifferent to the small creatures who dreamed of justice, something had changed in the galaxy, something that could never be unchanged. Hope. The humans had brought hope.